Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We're easing into this new year and things are going well. Yes, we're very excited for today's episode. We have Kristen Legan on, and she's the host of the Unbound Funbound podcast, and also past winner of the Unbound XL.
Yes, and we really wanted to have Kristen on because, we have a lot of clients and we know a lot of listeners that want to tackle Unbound or Unbound XL. And really just gravel races are, by nature, just seems like they're getting longer and longer. You're actually signed up for 2 that are 100 miles in the next 6 weeks. So I feel like this was very good timing for you as well.
Well, we've had some great episodes with Kylie and Zoe when they were on, and a couple others, including this one with Kristen, that really got me sort of amped, and so training's been going well. So yeah, we sort of decided to put a couple races as we eased our way down south in March. For training, to try and motivate training. So we'll see how that experiment goes. But yeah, that was the idea.
And actually, let's shout them out. We're going to homegrown gravel just outside of Atlanta, and then Valley of Tears in Turkey, Texas. Mm-hmm.
And that's, it has a lot of big hitters at that Valley of Tears one. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but I think what I love about both of them is they both still have that very grassroots vibe, even though they are starting to bring in, bigger people, bigger racers. I'm super excited, and I'll be there with Strong Girl Publishing at both of them doing some fun stuff. So definitely stay tuned for that. And obviously Peter will be racing. But in this episode, we are talking about everything from the kind of unexpected training volume that Kristen does and recommends for even these really big, huge races, 350 miles, we're still talking 10 to 12 hours a week. That's what she does most weeks.
Well, and you say unexpected. I guess it's we only have so much time as adults, certainly. The elites might have more, but it's interesting. You don't see that, massive difference in training volume, especially on average. But even if you look sort of across sports, endurance sports, you sort of train as much as you can because you want to build the engine. And you might do specific intervals or taper down in a certain way for a certain event. But that's sort of the reality, right? You just only have so much time. You can't just suddenly train more because you're doing a longer gravel race. That's just sort of like, I guess you could call this the sad adult, master's life. But, we all have our 8 to 10 hours.
Well, I think I say unexpected because I do think if you surveyed the crowd, and I include myself in this, you would guess that a lot of the top performers are doing, minimum 20 hours a week, blah, 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 to get ready for a race that's going to take you, 24 plus.
Right.
So I do think, the assumption is that, the longer the race, the more volume you're doing. But I even find in running, the longer the race actually does not change the volume overly much. Just shifts it slightly.
Well, and then there's always this, I'm always curious with, I probably bias more to that sort of minimum, you could call it minimum effective dose or optimal, which however you want to define it, I guess. But it's sort of this, you could probably train more, but at some point, the question is are you just training more, for the sake of it, or are you actually, is there an additional benefit, right? And that's sort of this, I like that inverted U, sort of picturing that rainbow where at some point it starts tapering off. The returns are not as great as each additional hour or unit of training. So it is sort of an interesting experiment of what can we get away with in some cases, because some people just don't have a lot of time and maybe don't even want to train a lot, right? They want to know that what's the most minimum training I can get away with and still succeed at this thing, whether that's finishing it, enjoying it, winning it, placing in it, qualifying, whatever the goal is. So that's sort of the minimum, and then you could go up a little bit from there to optimum. But then a lot of people, I think, dip over into that too much, and that's where you might see things like injury, burnout, motivation, or something like that.
Yeah, and I do think if you do have that couple extra hours, one of the things we do talk a lot about in this episode is focusing on the other things, the learning how to quickly fix your flat. Taking care of your bike, learning a bit about the bike mechanics. Kristen talks about having to do some side of the road.
Pretty major. I wouldn't want to do it in a muddy race. Yeah, derailleur plugs and,
yeah,
trying
lots of
to
stuff
get
like
it
that.
Forced into a gear. Yeah.
So I think, being prepped on that stuff, really kind of being a student of the sport with that side of things, the mechanical side, the sports psych side, what you're going to do when it's dark at night and your main competition has just passed you and left you in the dust. And what do you do as those lights in front of you are fading into nothingness? How are you going to respond?
Well, and I put forth sort of this model, it's sort of like a range. On one end, maybe we would put, track cycling or short track mountain bike racing if we wanted to stick to off-road, where it's, you could get someone's threshold or some of their power values and you could almost predict the race pretty well. But as we go along this spectrum or this range and get, maybe on the far end is some of these, multi-week bike packing, self-supported, right? It's really not that much. Fitness is important, but you'll probably become, whatever you are beyond. But there's so many things around logistics and saddle sores and clothes and the bags you have and all these things. And so this Unbound XL and Unbound are sort of at that, dip over where the fitness is important, but then you start wondering, if you only had so much time in the week, how much time would you invest to physical training versus getting your bike set up, the mechanical, get your tactical. We talk about Kristen figuring out where all the convenience stores are, because in this Unbound XL you can't take outside support, so you have to stop at convenience stores. So she had all these strategies and tactics around using the hose for a couple and carrying food versus buying food and pre-planning what she might get in the store. And so you start wondering how much of your limited time do you spend on fitness versus the tactical and all these other elements, and mechanical would be another one, obviously. So it is an interesting challenge where, again, when you hear that someone trains 12 hours on the bike, that's forgetting that there's maybe another 8 hours of all these other things, all the other L's, the technical, mechanical, and so forth.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it. Enjoy this episode. Definitely hit us up if you have any other gravel specific questions. We can bring Kristen back on. We can answer a bunch of them. But yeah, let us know what you want to hear more of. All right. Without further ado, here is Kristen Legan. Okay, Kristen, welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm so excited that we are finally doing this. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'm just going to backtrack. I think it actually was more like 16 years ago was the first time you and I crossed paths. And it's funny because today we're talking, primarily towards Unbound XL, these ridiculously long races, and we actually met on a ridiculously long, very rainy, some gravel before it was gravel ride with Tim Johnson on his ride on Washington back in 2009, 2010 maybe.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah.
What have you been up to since then? Because if I recall, you were a triathlete at the time.
Yeah, exactly. No, that ride on Washington. So that was a, what was it, 5-day bike group that we rode across from, where did we start? Boston to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And, and took in the sights along the way, that kind of thing. But that was my first big, long kind of bike ride, I would say, because I was racing triathlon, I was doing sprint, Olympic distance and draft legal kind of racing. And so then going into this kind of 100 plus miles per day idea was, I would say that helped me kind of realize, oh, this is actually pretty fun. I like these really long things. So you were there at the beginning, at least of my endurance side of things.
Even though it was raining and just atrocious weather that entire time. And it's where I got one of my favorite long ride phrases, which is it's just 10 more, I think was our battle cry. We didn't say what it was, 10K, 10 miles, 10 minutes, 10 hours. It could have been any of those, but it was always 10 more to the finish.
Now, this event strikes me as like a seminal event, at least for you, Molly, because it was where you met Tim Johnson, or at least spent time with Tim Johnson.
It's the longest I'd hung out with him, yes.
And then Rebecca
Rush,
was also on this. This just seems like this is the big bang of cycling.
Alan Lim
was there. Okay.
Gosh, yeah.
Stacked, big event.
So since then, you've come from triathlon and done a few things, a few notable Paul Mares along the way. So do you want to tell us just a little bit, about some of these Paul Mares that you've achieved along the way?
Sure. Yeah. So I think doing Ride on Washington, actually, that was, the impetus for a lot of this, but it also helped introduce me to I knew Kate Pallison before then, but she helped me get into the Rev Tour, where 6 women, we rode the entire Tour de France, one day ahead of the men's pro peloton in 2012. And so, that initial Washington trip then moved into this France trip. And so that again kind of just helped me realize like I love the bike. I love riding the bike. Triathlon maybe isn't my thing anymore. And so that helped me kind of move into the more cycling side of things. And since then have done, basically everything from cyclocross to, road racing and mountain bike racing, that kind of thing. But got into gravel actually, I would say on the earlier side, certainly wasn't, any of the first people to do that, but started racing Unbound in, I think my first year was 2013. So, the doing these long 200-mile gravel races when there was, I don't even know if we had GPS devices at that point. And so, yeah, just seeing kind of the transition into that. And so for the most part, the last, I guess it's over 10 years now, have been into the gravel side and been mixing it up in some different gravel races, 100-mile, 200-mile, and 350-mile races as well. So yeah, it's a whole.
Okay, what makes someone go 350 miles? You're already doing 200 wasn't long enough.
Right. Yeah, no, the 350, it was a really special. I was lucky enough to be invited to be part of the first year that they did that in 2018. So they invited 34 people to do the first edition of Unbound XL, because that was the original number of people who did, Unbound the first year it existed, I think in 2006. So anyhow, was invited to do that. Had a really eye-opening experience. Had some knee issues, had to pull out, so that was really disappointing. And so then it's always just been like that kind of it's something I wanted to go back to and really focus on eventually. And so yeah, I've did it again in 2019 and finished it thankfully, and then went back in 2022, 23 with like my eye on trying to win it. So that was, yeah, it was nice to experience it in a lot of different perspectives.
I love it. Now, if I recall, though, you also had some knee stuff going on at the ride on Washington. Have your knees just always been the limiter here?
No, I've been so durable in my entire like most of my triathlon racing, bike racing career. I think those were just kind of two fluky things that popped up at bad times, and unfortunately they were during events, but for the most part, I'm pretty healthy. So knock on wood, at least for now.
So they just popped up during the event pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ride on Washington one, right? Like that was the first time I'd ridden 100 miles back to back. That kind of like, of course, you're gonna experience some things there. And then the XL first edition. I think my seat post actually ended up slipping. Like looking back on it all now, I think like my seat post was slipping. I didn't catch it in time, and then I didn't know what was going on. And of course, you're in the middle of the night, calorie deprived, and you're like, I don't know, my body hates me. And so, yeah, just kind of spiraled from there, as I'm sure a lot of us endurance athletes have experienced.
Sure. And I guess that's experience, I guess, in some ways. I mean, that could happen and you don't think to check. But I know in this, the one you won most recently here, you had, was it your light fell off or your
Oh
Garmin fell
gosh.
off or something? And you had to tape it back on, right?
Yeah, that was a bit crazy. So yeah, about I don't know, like 75 miles into the 350-mile race, my light and my Garmin were kind of connected on one mount, and that mount broke off the bike. And so I was in a great group, and so I was so mad because I didn't want to, stop and go get it. So I turned around, went and got it, and then chased back on. And I was like, this is the dumbest idea. I'm like 75 miles into 350, and I'm chasing right now. But it was great because I got back in and was able to do it. But I had everything in my pocket, and I was just like, oh gosh, like what am I gonna do? So thankfully, at the first checkpoint, I had, some duct tape and some different tape that I'd packed for emergencies. And so I ended up taping my light to an arrow bar, hoping that it was pointed in the right direction, and trying to tape my Garmin on, but that did not work. So I ended up having to stash that in a little top tube bag. And thankfully, I knew the course really well. Like strangely enough, I knew it really well. So I'd only have to like unzip the little top tube bag every once in a while and check to make sure I'm on the right track. Had I not known the course, I think that would have been a bigger deal. But somehow it worked out.
Yeah, and it's amazing. They talk about experience when you get into these ultra like running races. Like it's just so like when you're predicting how someone will do, right? And it's a sad thing to tell an athlete, but it's like, you've done so many unbounds, so many events, period. Starting with the ride with Washington, the seminal event in cycling. And then, three, once you finish that one, XLs, and it's so there's just so many things, most obvious, I guess, the navigation of the course and the, where the places are. I know you researched the convenience stores. I heard this as well in the rumor mill. So it's hard to like how would you counsel someone, they're going into this for the first time, maybe have done gravel races, long events like Unbound, but then taking on the XL, like how do you counsel someone, when they're going into the XL when there's this overwhelming amount of information they need to take in?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think relying on some of that experience, right? And even if it's not the exact same experience that you're having out there, you can take some of the knowledge you've gained through, all of your different races and rides and put it into that experience. But I also think that the more you can just kind of slow down, take a deep breath, like eat a gel and think through the process a little bit, I think that's it's easy to get frantic and, make bad decisions out there when you're trying to do things quickly. And, it's a long race, it's a long event. And taking an extra 10, 15 seconds to just think about something and fix it. Nick and I, we talk, my husband, Nick, and I coach together sometimes. And we talk with athletes a lot about making a final fix. So instead of just trying to do something quickly and make it work for right now, like take the time to actually make that final fix so you don't have to go back and keep pumping your tire or keep taping your garment on or, all kinds of things. So just take a deep breath and fix it for good.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's a great thought. Yeah, like nursing the flat tire for 100 miles. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. One of the things I wanted to ask about was like how the main changes between like the 200 to 350. And I think it's pretty similar from what you just said, kind of to like when you're running a 50 miler versus running a 100 miler, where something in the 100 mile, like 50 miles, you can get through, 200 miles, you can get through. The 100 mile, the 350, the XL, something is going to go wrong. Like it is inevitable that there is going to be the thing that you actually do need to make the final fix on.
Yeah, I think, and you can, I mean, I did a 50-mile race and I think I out in Emporia one time and I got like 8 flats and that was like the most flats I've ever gotten, anytime riding at any event anywhere. And so it's, it can pop up anytime. But again, now that I experienced that 50-mile flat fest, I feel really confident using, Dynaplugs. So it was great, but frustrating in the moment. But I think you can take all of those and put it towards, success in the future.
Just taking a quick break from today's episode to talk up our favorite sponsor, Payable Apps. So if you're looking for a very easy way to take payments online, you can do it in a Google form using the Payable add-on. It makes everything so much simpler.
We've used it for things like our jersey orders. We've used it for clinics and different camps. And we have teacher friends who have used it for pizza days and different trips that they've gone on as well. And for a limited time, you can use our link, payableapps.com/athlete, to pay no app fees for 6 months. Plus, for a limited time, new users who use Square can save $200 on the Square app fees.
So try it out for your next event, pizza day, jersey order, or clinic, camp, whatever you need to take payments for. Check it out. Again, payableapps.com/athlete. Now, back to the episode.
We're always very curious about couples and how they solve this, like who races when. So I've heard that you and your Nick, you alternated Unbound for like 10 years, back and forth, who was competing, right? Is that true? Tell us a little bit about it, because we're always curious about this, like how do you solve when you both want to do the sport?
Yeah. No, it's we were definitely doing that. Nick started doing Unbound. He was, I think his first year was 2011. He was the one that dragged me out to it in 2013. And I think that year we both raced and had somebody else kind of supporting us. And then in 2015, I went back saying, I want to like give it a good shot, see what I can do. And having him as the support crew, we know each other so well. We ride together a fair bit, and just when you know how to motivate somebody, I think that's really important as the support crew. So that's when, we started kind of alternating. So one year I would kind of take on the race, he'd be my support crew, and then the next year we'd swap it around. Since, the XL is self-supported, it's been great because we've gotten to race that, the same year together. We don't race together, but we get to line up on the start line together a few times. So that's been fun. And then the last few years, he's been busy working at Unbound on race day. So unfortunately, he doesn't get to race much anymore out there. But I'll go and be his support crew at other events as well. But it's hard. I mean, especially when there's certain races both people want to do. It's always a challenge of, who's willing to put in the work that year, and then who's willing to kind of put the support aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, on that note, best tips for the person who's doing the supporting, because this is, definitely a lot of people listening are in these situations, whether it's they're supporting friends or spouses. And we've both had to be support for each other to varying levels.
It's nice. My races last 90 minutes, so it's not quite as big a deal.
I'm super good at it. But yours are scarier. They're like the bottle, and you're going really fast.
Oh, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, the high speed stuff is way harder than, yeah.
I'm limping in on foot. Like, I am not moving quickly.
Right. One thing that like for the 200, where we have the support crew out there, where Nick is out there and he can help, we go through it, we practice it, we say, this is how, what makes sense to me. I'm going to come in, I'm going to drop this, you can loop chain, check different things. And so we kind of have that process, because when you are, you're 150 miles into a race, it's hard to make good decisions. And so the more you can just kind of have that muscle memory already created, it helps. And just communicating that way. It may seem like outdated now, but back, in 2014, 15, when we were doing this, we were trying to dial in everything to make our pit stops so quick. And I mean, we were getting in and out of there in like a minute, which was really fast back then. And now it's like people don't even stop. But yeah, we wouldn't have a chair out. We wouldn't have he'd put the cooler top open so that I wouldn't be able to sit down, and just keeping that person going is important. And then for the longer events, so like the overnight stuff, so Unbound XL, and Nick's done like Trans Iowa before. He's going back to Iowa Wind and Rock this year. So those longer ones where you're inevitably going to have like these really down moments. And, if we get a call from the person, if as a support person, if you get a call from your racer, and you just have to be able to say no to them, I think. So if they're, if Nick were to call and be like, I'm feeling really sick, my stomach hurts, I think maybe you should come get me, and that kind of thing. It's like, you have to find ways to, obviously don't put them in a bad situation. But I think when we're out there so late in the night and, just so tired, you can't always make the clear choice for yourself. And so you need a little bit of help with that. So I think having conversations ahead of time to be like, no, unless I'm actually injured, unless you really think I'm in danger or, something's wrong, then like kind of give me that gentle nudge to just suck it up.
I love that.
Okay, well, maybe we get into, the nitty gritty, what we want. We have a few listener questions and athletes I work with who have questions too. So we'll get into that. So I'm trying to phrase, training for these things is such a large question. So I'm wondering, people may have prepared for something like Unbound, which it just strikes me as odd that these 200-mile races now are just like only the 200 miles.
Right.
But if someone were only prepared, had done this multiple times, something like a 200-mile race, something that's going to last, whatever, 12, 13, 14 hours for a lot of people. And now they're looking at this thing that might be, in your case, it was 23, 24 hours, I think, for this XL type race. What's the difference in the training? And I know you did it as part of the lifetime thing, but let's pretend someone's doing this as like an A race. It's like their main focus. What do you see as the main differences in the programming in those months before, when they're preparing, A race for 200 miles versus A race for this 350 XL event?
I think it's actually it's not as different as you might think, especially from the physiological side of things. At least that's my experience working with athletes and myself, is that there isn't like big changes in, you're not going out and doing just giant rides all the time. Like there's still some strength elements, some speed elements built in. And that's how I like to work with athletes, is less just making things really efficient, I would say. But where the big difference is, I think, is like being really, really comfortable with your gear. There's a lot more gear involved in terms of like your light setup, you're supporting yourself. So knowing how, can you refill your Camelback, your hydration pack quickly at a gas station? And so practicing that, I think, is that's the biggest difference between doing a, supported event, and then just riding at night. Plenty of people are riding at night during Unbound 200, but you're 100% going to have to during XL. And so the more comfortable you can get riding at night, knowing your light setup, how long do your batteries last? What level of light do you actually need to be riding at in order to maintain that battery level? And so it's more of those key things that I think that would be, the bigger catastrophe out there is you running out of battery, for your lights than, any workout that you could do to make yourself a little bit faster.
Sure. That's a great answer. Yeah. And I think that's it. Like there's only so much adaptation, adaptive capacity or
Mhm.
time in the week, however you want to think about this,
Right.
it's that's sort of the way. I think that's great. I like that idea that it like almost shifts some of your focus and the importance and the gains you're going to get from equipment, maybe tactics, maybe researching stuff, versus maybe the time you would put into like the ultimate sweet spot threshold VO2 high intensity workout. The benefits of those two for that specific event maybe shift a little bit, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Maybe well, you mentioned lights. We'll come back to training in a second, but any tips, aside from don't break it off your bar like you did,
Right.
I guess have your duct tape is a good gear
Yes.
thing, but
Yeah.
for lighting, is there a go-to light that you have or like, any lighting advice? Because you're getting through a whole night versus, as you say, the
Mhm.
200-mile people maybe have a few hours to survive.
Yeah. Well, lighting is so varied, right? Some people run a dynamo hub, and they can power some of their lights through that way. I don't do that for shorter events like this. So like replaceable batteries, is a big thing. Like you can't charge your light out there. So USB rechargeable light's probably not a great idea, unless you're absolutely positive it can last, the full time. So just thinking about how can you replace those quickly and, how many sets of batteries do you need to carry? Can you buy something at a convenience store? But the big thing that I learned, because I did not follow my advice and I didn't practice riding at night very much, heading into XL. Um, but I really like a lot of light and like, no duh, but I would rather take the weight penalty of carrying more batteries to run my lights on high or, at a higher level and have that visibility than, trying to eke out, just keeping it on low to save battery. So
Mhm.
for me, that's certainly like, yeah, something I keep telling people is just practice it, find what you're comfortable with, and then just know that running a lot of light is great.
Well, and it strikes me the speed you are going or were going in that event, the risk of flatting and crashing is well worth being able to
Yeah.
see, right? Like if you were just going very slow, this is taking a lot of time, then your risk of flatting would go down. But it strikes me you'd be going very fast at times.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the faster you can go, the better, right? We're in a race. And so you need those lights. And, the beam patterns can change too, right? Like how far out it's pointed can change, like where you're looking when you're riding. So you might miss some things if the beam
Mm,
patterns aren't there. And so I run a headlamp and a handlebar light. And so it has kind of some variations that you can use
sure.
to change it up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's what the 24-hour racers would use, like on the mountain
Hmm.
bike too, right? It's a little more
Yeah,
technical, I guess, but as we say,
totally. Yeah.
you're going pretty fast and want to see stuff, and then there's
Yeah.
redundancy, I guess, too, right?
Right, exactly. It's nice to have that little backup in case something fails.
Okay, well then let's, for you as you prepared for this winning effort, what would you say like the key like sort of benchmark workouts would be? Like was it riding for 24 hours or like what do you have to do to get ready? Like what's like the key workout? Not every week, but like what were the one or two or three key workouts you had to get done or thought you had to get done?
That's a great question. For me personally, everybody's different. For me personally, I have such a huge background in this that I know I don't need these giant rides. I think I maybe did one or two 100-mile rides that whole season, and then everything else was shorter than that. I don't think you need to go ride, 200 miles in order to race 200 miles. So, but it also depends, if you're a newer cyclist, having some of that longer endurance riding is helpful because it also helps you understand, like, can I sit on my saddle that long? What do
Hmm.
my hands do after that? So I do think long rides are important, but it doesn't necessarily need to be these giant, huge rides. So for me, it's actually more like intervals. So like having certain workouts that I do where I'm like, okay, I'm hitting numbers that I should be hitting. Like I'm in a good spot. But it's not like, can I ride 200 miles today and see that? But again, every athlete's different. And I think that's something like we all have to just kind of figure out for ourselves is it's also like this mental thing, right? Where maybe you don't need it physically to go do these big rides, but if it allows you to have the confidence that you can accomplish this next event by doing a certain ride or a certain distance, then I'd say that's worth the effort of doing it.
Yeah, I like that. It makes a lot of sense that, if you had to experience, as you say, this the saddle comfort could
Mhm.
be just a disastrous ordeal in 350 miles. Or just some of these other things that maybe you've experienced by doing these other events over the years. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it is interesting that if we're strictly speaking about physiology and like the engine, you're saying you would rather bias towards quality and recovery capacity and lower risk of injury and illness and all this other stuff. It's nice to hear. I like to hear.
Yeah, yeah. It's cool. I think like the world, the coaching world is kind of coming back to that a little bit. I do think that, like, you watch some of the top pros on like gravel racers right now, and you see them doing these like massive weeks of training, just like just a competition to see who can spend more time on their bike. And it's cool, and like it sounds really fun, if that's your job and you can do that. But for a lot of us, we can't spend, 37 hours a week riding. And so finding ways how does your body react to certain types of training, and using that to just keep things efficient, keep things fun, and also have a life outside of bikes,
Sure.
it's important too.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'd love it if you could kind of talk about the, recovery side of
Mhm.
things in terms of like, when you are putting in these kind of like efforts and volume. Talk to
Mhm.
me about the like eating enough and sleeping
Mhm.
enough and kind of all of like those things that don't really
Yeah,
get logged in training peaks, but I
right.
think are probably like more important maybe.
Oh, totally. Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you can't recover from something, you can't go out the next day and do something. So, for me, I think sleep is the best recovery tool we have. It's free, as much as we can, and it's the easiest thing that we can add it more into our lives. So it's great to have all these different recovery, machines and different things that we can do, and I think those all add to it and are helpful, and I'm sure people are benefiting from them. But if we can all just like sleep an extra hour, extra half an hour a night, it's probably going to add to your recovery. So I work with a lot of athletes on just like create, I'm sure we've all heard it, creating the bedtime routine, sleeping at a lower temperature, not drinking not drinking at all is probably helpful for all of us. But just trying to stay off screens right before bed, that kind of thing, so that you can really boost your quality of sleep, and as well as quantity. So I think that's, number one. And then, yeah, like when you're training, like, oh man, the amount of food you can go through. And so it's hard sometimes to even keep up with it. And so that's where having a coach or somebody that knows you well, they can tell your personality changes, right? Like we all get hangry when we're tired and hungry and haven't eaten enough. And so if you have somebody who can kind of be like, you know, maybe training's going a little too much right now, maybe take a step back and, spend a little time of recovery. I think that's, it's important because we can't get better if we're not recovering.
For sure. Yeah. I love it.
I don't want to beat this too much, but as you were preparing, you may not know this, but we
Mhm.
are in the season of the like Strava wrapped and everything is
Yeah.
wrapped now. I don't
It's
understand
true.
why this is the marketing strategy we're all taking, but we are. So I'm wondering if you can think back to your wrapped for 2023. Like, do you have an idea, like a biggest week or average week or
Mm.
typical week leading into that Unbound? Thinking sort of the 3 months before, I guess, that type of thing. Like, do
Yeah.
you have an idea?
Yeah, so myself, I like taking like almost the uh, training camp idea in a way. So like I'll take 4 days where I maybe don't have a lot of work on a Thursday and a Friday, and I'll take a 4 week block every, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks, and just really try and make that a significant effort of boosting volume or really pushing intensity, something in there. So
Mhm.
I'd say I maybe did like two or three of those in the 3 months leading up to Unbound, where it was just like, okay, a 4 day concerted effort to get some good volume in. But I'd say like on average, my weekly average of riding was like, I don't know, 10 to 12 hours a week, maybe.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it
it's like
wasn't,
you work and have other stuff to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So,
Okay.
it's still plenty. I mean, that's still hard to get in, but was manageable and it didn't feel super overwhelming to just kind of keep that the consistency. And then maybe those big weeks were more like a 17-hour week or something like that.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, but you sort of answered that. So yes, it's still not massive, but you'd maybe do like 3 hours every day for 4 days, or like a little
Yeah.
variety there. Or maybe one's longer, one's shorter and harder or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just getting some back to back. I think that's helpful with like increasing the fatigue and helping boost kind of some fatigue resistance of getting your body to that point where it has to push
Mhm.
beyond what it's normally used to.
Yeah, I do the same in Canada. We have a long weekend almost every month, so I just call it
Uh-huh.
a long weekend block.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's sort of the idea, and I do prefer those, right? Where we're getting ready for Leadville, it just strikes me as like you get three ride experiences that are good and they're
Mhm.
easier to recover from, and it's better than like one jumbo and then some crappy ones around it or
Yeah.
something, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Now, what about strength? Because I know you and I talked about this a little bit
Mhm.
last week, so I'd love to hear kind of how you think about strength on like kind of an
Mhm.
annual basis. Also, I've seen you beat Tim Johnson at arm wrestling, so I know you're strong.
Yeah, you hear that, Tim? It's noted here. No,
You heard
no
it here,
strength.
folks.
Yeah. Strength, I think strength is just so important for us, as athletes, but just as humans, as we're getting aging, everything comes back to you, just how your body strength, but also how you move and just keeping everything really fluid and mobile. So I think strength is a huge part. I think year-round strength training is that's something I prefer, and I like having my athletes do it that way. But I think you can, prioritize it right now in the winter season that we're talking, where maybe you're spending a little bit less time on the bike. It's cold where I live, it's super snowy out right now, so I'm not getting these big, super long weekend rides in. So maybe I'll prioritize an extra day of lifting or just some mobility work. I will like full transparency here. Until like the last year and a half, I wasn't doing any strength training. I told everybody they needed to do strength training, but I wasn't actually doing it myself. But the last year and a half, I've kind of made that a big effort, and it's cool. You really do see those changes and just feel better on the bike. So yeah, I'd say lifting heavy. It doesn't, we're endurance athletes, so we always tend to go like, well, how many reps can I do? But I mean, I'd rather see you do like 6 really hard reps than, 15 moderate ones. So, yeah, so I think it's again one of those personal, how each of us adapts to it is different. So some people might work better with a higher rep kind of idea, but just the fact of getting in the gym and doing the work is the key.
Nice. Love it. A couple more specific, as Molly keeps like getting us off of XL questions. But this is
Just trying to
this,
keep it open
this
for
I would
everybody.
say this is a question open to anything. So there might be some variability in your answer. But a client's doing a gravel race, then it can be like your 50 miler where you flat it a lot might change the answer up to Unbound XL. How do you think about inserts specifically for lighter riders or female riders or like something like that? Is there any variability in your answer, or is it just always inserts, which is sort of what I usually say? But I'll let you. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I've had a long journey with inserts. Just trying different ones, trying them before, I think inserts are really good right now, and I think they work well with most, modern tire constructions. So it's a little bit better. But I've had ones where I'd had to cut the tire off the rim because I couldn't get the tire off
Oh
because
no.
the insert was causing problems. So that first experience got me like really nervous about inserts, and I was like, I don't know, you probably shouldn't do it if you can't, take your tire off in the middle of racing in case you need to. But I think, they are just great extra protection. They add a tiny bit of weight, but also I think they actually help the ride feel for people. So for gravel. So I think, whether you're a heavier rider, I think it's probably more important for a heavier rider, but I don't think it necessarily, as a lighter rider, you don't need to. It's some, yeah, more of a personal, preference for the ride feel, but also comfort in being able to take your tires on and off. So I tell every athlete, if you're gonna run inserts, great idea. Just make sure you practice taking them in and out on the road, because it's not the most straightforward thing with all tire and rim combos.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great thought, especially when you're, as you say, self-supported and
Mhm.
middle of the night and that sort of thing. So it's sort of this gamble of like, will it prevent the flat or
Right.
or am now I am in this weird situation? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it at that then. And then what about fueling, I would say specific to your 2023 race, but we can
Mhm.
extrapolate it out. Like, what did you do? Like, are you eating just, convenience store? I know you had the map, so were you just eating
Mhm.
like, I don't know, what's a convenience store food?
Snickers bars.
Snickers bars, or
Yeah.
are you like at the like 90 grams, 120 grams of just pure carb gels the whole time? Like, what does this look like when we're riding for 24 hours?
So in 2023, I started with a lot of high carb mix with and brought it with me. So I started, obviously with my bottles and my pack filled with that. And then it was somewhat of more of a strategic decision to bring the powders, um, so that I wouldn't have to stand in line at a convenience store to buy a bunch of Gatorades. I could use the hose tap outside and just fill up my bottles, throw the powder in, and keep going. Because I was really nervous that especially the first town, it would just be chaos. And apparently it was, but I was able to kind of skip it. I was able to like just use the park uh, water fountain and fill up bottles there and then get on the road faster than everybody who stopped at the convenience store. So that was a little bit more of a strategic decision. I still think like I would do that again, but I probably wouldn't bring as much as I didn't get through nearly as much of that as I thought I would. And part of that is that, we continually need to train ourselves to be able to take on that high carb nutrition. And at some point in 350 miles, your stomach's probably not going to be super stoked to take that in.
Hmm.
So being able to know when the time is to switch over to real food or other types of food, I think it's hard because we don't go and train this. And so you don't know when that's going to happen, but knowing what could, having options, I think of like a toolbox, having different tools in your toolbox that you could say like, oh, sweet stuff sounds terrible to me right now. I'm going to go to more salty, real food, versus, later in the day when maybe you want sweet stuff again. And so having just different options from the convenience stores, is good. But again, like it's hard to predict. The first year in 2018 or 2019, I had this amazing Casey's convenience store breakfast sandwich, like an egg breakfast sandwich. And I still like, oh, it sounds so good right now to me. It sounds terrible. But it was the best thing I have ever eaten. And then I tried to do that again in 23. The sun was coming up. I was at a Casey's. I was like, okay, here's my sausage egg sandwich. And I took one bite of it and was just like, I can't chew. Like I had to spit it out. I could not chew that thing. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and you just have to see what I had a terrible stomach during 2023. And I ate a disgusting amount of Sour Patch Kids. That was the only thing I could eat for about 200 miles.
Oh.
So,
So you had that much Sour Patch Kids, or you were buying them at the convenience store?
I was buying them at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd started buying stuff, and that was like I was like, that maybe that'll work. But
Hmm.
yeah, I tried. I think there were some other things obviously mixed in there, but
Okay.
that's what I remember. But I think just being able to kind of roll with it and say what sounds like when your body, what sounds good to you is probably gonna be able to get down. And it may not be the perfect 90 grams of carbs per hour, but at that point, you just got to get down what you can.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Sounds to me like the PSA here too is like on your long training rides,
Hmm.
like using that as both an opportunity to use the fuel that you do have, so like the powders and whatever, and like make sure you
Right.
actually can take in that much and like fuel the way you
Yeah.
would for the race.
Yeah.
But also maybe even doing a couple like gas station,
Yeah.
surf the aisles and see what
Hmm.
appeals after like 5 hours. So you have that in
Yeah.
mind.
When you spend some time, like when you slow down and take some time walking the aisles of a convenience store, there's so much stuff there. I don't know. I've just never really seen it. And so you start going through it and you're like, oh, that could work. Or, some ideas come around. So I do think that anybody doing XL, just go to in any gas station, right? They all have the same thing basically, and just spend some time in there and start to try some different things. Like there's one type of Gatorade that I really like that's this like cucumber mint flavor. So it's kind of different. It's not like super lemon lime kind of idea. So it's a nice palate cleanser or change. So just trying those things out on your rides or yeah, when you're driving down the highway.
I love it.
Now,
Any excuse, really,
Yeah,
to
exactly. I
go.
do
Yeah.
love snacks, so fair,
Yeah,
like going in there and
exactly.
getting to pick out like candy bars is like dream come true for me. So
Hmm.
mm, yeah, I guess it's something to look forward to. Yeah, during the ride.
yeah.
So then related to that, I often think about nutrition and pacing as sort of like, I don't know if it's like yin and yang
Mhm.
or something like that, the two sides of a coin. So I have heard that this race, like, it was started a little aggressively. I don't know if that's because of the mass start aspect, but when you say that the race starts hard, can you like, what does that mean? Like, were you like really like racing, like sprinting, like a mountain bike race, or like what does this mean in an XL of like starting hard? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's different for everybody, right? The front of the group, I think we rode it. It started at least in 2023 for the first like maybe 5 miles. It was pretty chill. Like I was taking pulls on the front, like hanging out and saying hi and stuff. And then we hit like kind of a significant turn where we knew, of course, 2023 was the year of like crazy mud. And we knew this one turn, you would turn and you'd have a little bit, and then the potential for mud was pretty high. And so at that point is when everything just kind of exploded. And so you see people like, like Taylor Ladine and some of the top men really pushing the pace. And so for me to stay with them, it was a sprint. It was like, elbows out, making sure I got my position, not being always the most friendly in terms of like taking the line that you need to. But then we got through that mud section, and that's when they kept the pace on. And I knew we were going into this big stair step climb, the towers climb. And there was no way I was going to be able to continue kind of at that speed, that pace, and be able to get up that climb with those top guys. And so that's where I was able, like I said, nope, I'm gonna, have the confidence that I can come back and I can, make up time when I need to, but I'm not gonna blow myself up here. And so Cynthia, Frazier, she went off the front or Cynthia Carson, sorry, went off the front with the men, and she, lasted up the climb with them and stuff. But she had that same kind of realization, I think, just at the top of it, and she was just like, "Nope, can't do this. Like, not gonna blow all of the matches at this point." And so we ended up coming back together, and so it was really just figuring out, where is your where's your point where the point of no return, basically, where like how hard can you go and still be able to come back, recover, eat, and keep pushing for another, 325 miles.
Yeah. Yeah, that's early for that to happen. Were you using like power or heart rate to guide any of your pacing early and say, or is it just strictly like you could tell you were breathing and working way too hard?
Yeah, for me, it's with enough experience, I kind of know where that blow point is, and it's like you can do it, but you're going to pay the price for it. And so that's what I talk with a lot of people about is trying to use practice events, practice races to find that point because it's really it's hard to predict where what you're going to feel right before you blow up. And so go
Hmm.
into a race where you're willing to blow up. And then that way you can say, okay, I'm at that point or I'm getting close to it. This is when I need to say, I'm going to settle down a little bit.
Hmm.
But you can also use power. You can also use heart rate if that's something that's going to help guide you. I just think race days are always so unpredictable and it's hard to know how your body's going to respond. So I think really paying attention to just how you feel through that is the most effective way to find that point.
And I think it relates to what you were saying about what's the balance of what's going to determine this race, right? How much of it is
Hmm.
the power and the heart rate where it might be more relevant, whereas like this is more of a who's going to pedal for 350 miles. And
Right.
so it becomes, at some point everyone is like at the pace they're going.
Right.
You could certainly really mess it up in those first 25 miles, racing it like
Yeah.
a 25-mile race, but I
Yeah.
don't imagine most people do that in a 350-mile race. Hmm. Okay. Okay.
I want to know how the mindset works when it's middle of the night and you're, alone on the road. You're the only light you can see. Especially when you're racing. I don't know
Hmm.
how tight it's ever been for you, but like how do you kind of keep that like keep going mentality?
Right.
Because the only time I've had like a 24-hour kind of thing, I was so far like I was where I was in the field.
Hmm.
Like it's 5 hours ahead. So it was really just like keep going. There wasn't like an
Yeah.
oh crap kind of thing. So how do you keep going like hard in that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it does. It really depends on what you're out there to accomplish, right? And I think having that different mindsets for those different types of things. Like again, like in 2023, like I was there to win. Like I had planned, my season around it. I'd done the prep. I knew I was ready to do it if I had the luck on the day. And so it was really easy, right? Like I was in the lead at that point. I was actually chasing down a lot of the men because we had that crazy mud and like I don't know, like an 11-mile hike-a-bike in the middle of the night. And
Perfect
so,
for the triathlete.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, the guys that I was catching were kind of, they were falling off the front pack and maybe they were in pretty down like low points because they had just lost the front and all these things. And I'm coming through like chugging along, just being like, hey, how's it going? And they're just like, oh my God, shut up. But
Nothing
it's,
more fun than getting
I
to
know.
do that to the men that you passed. Like,
No, but they were all so nice and like they were like offering me food and stuff and I was like, no, I'm good and everything. They were just like, I'm gonna pull out, here's all my water and stuff. And I was like, well, I don't want your muddy water, but thank you. No. So getting through the nights has never been a big problem for me because it's always been like in the hunt, in the chase for it. But I do think that going into the whatever event you're doing and having just a clear goal when whether that's finishing, whether that's, saying hi and chatting with people along the way, like having that to motivate you when you kind of lose sight of it in the middle of the night and you're just like, man, this stinks. Like I'm tired and miserable out here. You got to keep going back to the kind of, why are you out there? And then just, I think practicing being in the like I did a lot of visualization work which was new for me going into this and I practiced like what happens when you get a flat, what happens when you are just bumming on the day and how do you get yourself out of that, and practicing going through that in my mind helped me kind of like think through it a little bit more and say, oh, you're just low on calories right now, eat a little bit more, you're going to be happy in a minute. So
Yeah.
amazing how many things can be solved by, do you need a snack?
exactly, it basically everything I would say.
It's probably a good first thing to try. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they call that's like a pre-mortem almost. You could like go through like
Hmm.
what are you worried about or what could go wrong and then like
Yeah.
what are the possible solutions? Yeah, I think that's a great exercise. And then so would you actually like visualize yourself fixing the flat?
Yeah, and I think one of the big ones now that we're talking about it that I thought about is that I typically I'm a slow starter. I don't love the like racy starts. And I knew it was going to be racy. I knew, Cynthia was going to go fast. She's a really strong starter and stuff. So I visualized that break off point. Okay, when does she go with the lead men? And when, not to get just totally super down on that because I
Right.
think that's an easy one to just be like, okay, race is over, it's gone. And so being able to just say, nope, confidence that this is my pace, this is my plan. And so I went through that all often of just like push through, but then when it's time to say bye to those guys, say bye. But yeah, same thing for fixing a flat, like not freaking out. I think that's the biggest thing is just this happens to all of us. We can all come back from it. I had all kinds of mechanical problems out there with the mud and, was able to I rode for an hour single speed because I thought my rear derailleur was broken, and apparently I just had unplugged it. So, um,
Hmm.
that was not a final fix. I did not make that final fix when I looked at it originally. So, just taking the time to calm down and yeah, just get through it.
I forgot about that part of your story. What an adventure, right? Like a full day of
It
adventures that you
was,
were on. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's like, when people are asking, tips and things, you talked about fixing the flat, know your equipment like the inserts, but then it's even things like those electric derailleurs. Molly
Hmm.
seems to not be able to ride an electronic shifter without like turning one off, and I still haven't figured out how she does it. But knowing how to turn it back on or resync it,
Right.
or in your case, like where the plugs are and
Yeah,
troubleshoot things.
yeah.
Look,
Yeah.
Herefords just have a weird electromagnetic thing that happens to us. We can't wear wristwatches. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. You can't wear wristwatches.
Just analog.
Everyone in my family, like we break, it all just breaks down. I don't know.
Okay. These are more like general, you're coaching an athlete who's maybe doing, again, a longer event and involves some
Mhm.
nighttime stuff. What, I guess maybe it's obvious, but maybe not. I'm curious what you did or what you would advise them to do as far as getting ready. I've never ridden in the night. I only race mountain bike race, but now I'm going to do Unbound and I'm going to take a while. So you're going to get me ready. Like, what would be some things I should do to get ready to night ride or race in this case?
Yeah, I think starting in the light and going in through dusk, and as it's getting darker and seeing that transition happen, and knowing, when to turn on your light, how to just even going through the motions of like, pushing the buttons, because sometimes, you have to hold it down a little bit longer, or you have to double tap or something. So just practicing like actually turning your lights on and off sounds really simple, but it's important. Um, Doing that. And then I'd say just practice close to home where it's, if you feel uncomfortable, if you, or drive somewhere where you can do this safely at night, but you're not out on a 5 hour ride trying to figure this out, 70 miles from home. So do some practice close to home, and then expand from there, then go out for a little bit later ride, go, wake yourself up at 2 a.m. and go ride, and see what it feels like to be out. Because the light changes, and then obviously like with the moon, everything, like you might have a totally pitch black night out there, or it might be really bright because, a full moon on the prairie can be really, pretty, you almost don't need lights. So just practicing in different conditions, I think, is helpful too, because then you'll know which setting to use, and maybe you have to aim your lights in a different way.
I never thought about the moon thing, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to check the cycles of the moon
Yeah.
for my night races.
Yes.
This is genius.
Yeah.
I think I love that. And that could be part of your long weekend block, or your 4 day block, where you do the bigger volume too, right? Where
Mhm.
it might be you just get to the place on time on the Thursday or whatever, or maybe you ride to the place at night. I don't know however you set this up, but I like that. And then it strikes me that that early wake up almost would be a good simulation of just maybe where you're a little grumpy or tired feeling early in
Right.
the morning without having to ride, as we started with this podcast, talking about the person who thinks maybe they need to ride 24 hours to race 24 hours. There's maybe a piece to that. Like if you were up once in your training cycle at 2 a.m. and you turned your lights on and you went for a ride at 2 a.m. or rode into the morning or whatever time, maybe 4 a.m. is reasonable enough
Mhm.
or something, that maybe you'd experience that. Like, do you think there's a possibility there that someone might be able to, if they haven't done the 24-hour race, that might be like an experience to be had?
Yeah. Again, the more experience you can give yourself, the better you're going to do in the race. And so, practicing in different times of the night, understanding, like, I don't necessarily think you need to go ride through the night to
Hmm.
do that. I think it can be helpful for some athletes, especially if you're really concerned about sleepiness. I think, I have one athlete who really struggles with getting very, very sleepy out there. So we've been working on some different caffeine protocols and that kind
Mm.
of thing. For me, I like, yeah, I don't know, I must have done enough of like all-nighters in college or something like that to, it doesn't affect me too much. So I don't have to worry, but knowing how you might respond out there, I think practicing that, by doing different rides at different times of the night could be helpful.
Now, I think, props with this athlete you're t speaking towards, like you did say also that sleep's very important. So I always
Hmm.
struggle with this one because sometimes it's like I'm suggesting it maybe once or twice, and then it's like
Hmm.
every Friday I'm riding till 4, and it's like, well, that wasn't quick.
No.
So what kind of, maybe to yourself or maybe to this athlete who is concerned about the fatigue, how often, in the run, the 3 months before, would you suggest doing some of these like actual, you can test your lights in your house whenever you want, but
Mhm.
actually riding at night, that type of thing. Like, is
Yeah.
that a one or two thing, or like how often do you think?
Yeah, I think, something where you're really disrupting your sleep pattern, I think once is probably enough, maybe twice if like the first time doesn't go well for you. But I agree. Like, I think that disrupting that and throwing your body all out of whack, you're going to have to spend so much more time recovering from that that it's not going to actually benefit you in the long run, especially in terms of training.
Mhm.
But you can get, I think you can get most of it done either if you're a morning person, just wake up, an extra hour early, or, sometime when it's a little bit dark. Actually, right now is a great time of the year for people to try this if you
Yeah,
don't
it's
live
probably
super cold
dark right now.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can go out like at 6 p.m. and it's dark. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus, in May when you're gonna have to go out pretty late. So, but
Mhm.
yeah, I would say sleep is gonna still just be the priority for the most part.
Yeah, it's frustrating. All these like, like it's sort of boring the stuff, right? But it's like, no, you just gotta, the boring stuff's the stuff. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not.
it adds up. So then you can focus on the fun stuff, like all the marginal gains and that kind of stuff. But these are the big gains, right? And so you have to take care of these first in order to really like get to, think about using ketones or, all the different things. Like they're great, but I'm sure they work. But if you're not riding your bike, more than a few hours a week, then maybe focus on that before you start finding all these smaller things to work on.
Cool.
I love it. All right, before we wrap up, since we started this by talking about duct tape and the importance of duct tape, are there any other tiny pieces of gear that have made a world of difference that you shouldn't do these big adventures without?
Oh man, that's usually duct tape is my answer to that. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I used out there. I mean, good music, right? Like something like that that's something that can really change your mindset, I think is important too. So if you're a music person I know people that like to listen to like podcasts or people that don't listen to music at all out there, that's fine. But just knowing something that can switch you out of a bad mood. Maybe you've tried your snack already and you're still in that bad mood, then there's something else you could try that's just like something that you look forward to.
And that's allowed during the race? Like I didn't, okay. This is me in my like 90-minute UCI, like, so this isn't allowed, but this is something so that's like, that could be very powerful, right? Like, I think that's a well-supported, like music it gets you going. Like that's a good thing. And then, so do you hold on to that till like a low point, like versus starting with it?
Yeah, I did last time. I think I maybe started it, well, probably when that like 11-mile hike-a-bike started. And I was just like, all right, I need something to get me through this. But yeah, I try and like savor it, I guess.
Okay, that's a great tip. And I mean, again, we always talk about like reading the tech guide and knowing the rules and the things, right?
Exactly.
Like
And the rules change. And I know like in the 200 and like when you're around a lot of people, you're around thousands of people, I think it could potentially be different. I'm not positive actually. So yeah, definitely read your rules. Don't break any rules, but if you can use music, use it.
For sure.
Those are
perfect.
Great. Okay.
All right. Tell everyone where they can find you, follow along, get all of the things.
So yeah, you can always find me on socials. My handle is KP Legan. KP's an old nickname of mine. So KP Legan, also you Rambler Coaching online and website as well. You can reach out there with any questions or, anything you need for that. So yeah.
Perfect. And we'll put links to both of those in the show notes. Kristen, thank you so much for hanging out. That was so much fun.
Thank you. It's been awesome. Fun to relive it a little bit. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.